What if the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent? Not because you don't have a voice, not because you're afraid, but because you're stronger than the chaos around you. Jesus didn't fight back. He didn't yell to defend himself. He didn't explain his side of the story. He stayed silent, even when people lied about him, even when the crowd shouted, even when he was facing death. Before Pilate, before the angry crowd, before the cross, Jesus could have spoken. He could have stopped it all, but he chose stillness. And in that silence, he showed us something most people miss. You don't need to raise your voice to stand in power. Sometimes, the quietest moment is the one that changes everything. Why silence is the strongest strategy. Jesus stood on trial, falsely accused, lied about, misunderstood. People shouted. Leaders twisted his words. The crowd demanded his death. And yet, he remained silent and gave no answer. No defense, no anger, no fear, just stillness. Most of us would have said something, tried to prove ourselves, tried to explain the truth, tried to fix the moment. But Jesus didn't. He knew exactly who he was. He didn't need to prove anything. And in that silence, he revealed something deeper than words could ever say. History is full of powerful people who understood the strategy of silence. Napoleon used it to confuse his enemies. Marcus Aurelius used it to master his emotions. Even modern CEOs use silence to lead meetings with calm authority. But Jesus? He didn't use silence to gain control. He used it to show where real power comes from. In a world that reacts quickly, he chose to respond with quiet strength. In a world that shouts to be heard, he listened. In a world that demands attention, he stayed still. And that stillness, it didn't make him weaker. It made him untouchable. So here's the truth we'll explore today. Silence isn't empty. It's full of strength. And Jesus used it not to escape pain, but to walk through it with power. 1. Silence disarms the enemy. Jesus stood in front of the most powerful religious leaders of his time, and he knew exactly what was happening. They weren't looking for truth, they were looking for control. They weren't interested in who he really was. They just wanted to trap him in his words. False witnesses were lined up. Accusations were flying. The tension in the room was thick. And in the middle of that chaos, Jesus didn't shout. He didn't defend. He didn't even correct them. He just stood in silence. But Jesus remained silent. Why? Because he wasn't there to win the moment. He was there to win eternity. And he knew something we often forget. The enemy gains power through reaction, but he loses power when you stay grounded. People who try to control or manipulate you, they rely on your emotional response. They want you to defend yourself so they can twist your words. They want you to get angry so they can feel justified. They want you to panic so they can feel superior. But when you choose silence, intentional, steady, spirit-led silence, you flip the dynamic. Suddenly, they don't know what to do with you. They can't feed off your energy. They can't drag you into their game, because silence is deeply unsettling to those who rely on chaos. And Jesus knew that. His silence didn't make him passive. It made him undeniably powerful. It was a dominance tactic in the most spiritual way. He knew who he was. He didn't need validation. He didn't need to explain himself to people who had already closed their hearts. That's not weakness. That's spiritual clarity. And here's where it gets personal. You and I live in a world full of noise. People project, accuse, exaggerate. Sometimes it's on social media. Sometimes it's in our families. Sometimes it's inside our own head. But the question is, do you have to respond to all of it? Or can you do what Jesus did and let silence become your strength? Sometimes silence is how you say, I'm not here to please. I'm here to obey. I don't need to win this moment. I'm anchored in something bigger. I don't answer to the pressure. I answer to God. So the next time someone provokes you, pause. Breathe. Ask the Spirit, is silence the greater weapon right now? Because sometimes saying nothing is how you say the most. 2. Stillness is control in chaos. There's a moment in the Gospels that shows us exactly what spiritual strength looks like, and it doesn't come through noise or reaction. Jesus and his disciples were crossing the sea. The sky was calm at first, but out of nowhere, a violent storm hit. Waves slammed into the boat, wind roared, water started flooding in, and the disciples, men who had grown up on this water, panicked. They tried to save the boat. They shouted. They feared for their lives. But Jesus? He was in the back of the boat, asleep on a cushion. He wasn't unaware. He wasn't careless. He was calm because he was anchored. The disciples finally woke him up, crying, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And Jesus stood up. No panic, no yelling, no fear, just authority. He said to the wind and the waves, "Peace, be still." And instantly, the storm stopped. The sea obeyed, not because he raised his voice, but because he carried stillness before the storm ever did. This is the power of inner peace. The disciples had the same storm outside, but they didn't have the same calm inside. They reacted to the chaos. Jesus responded from stillness. And that's the lesson for us. You don't have to match the chaos around you. You don't have to react to everything that shakes your world. Real power is shown when you can stay grounded, while everything else feels out of control. So the next time life feels like it's spinning, pause. Don't rush to fix it. Don't react out of fear. Take a breath and ask, is this a storm to fight, or a moment to stay still and trust? Because the loudest one isn't always the strongest, and the storm isn't always your enemy. Sometimes it's just your opportunity to show the world what peace really looks like. 3. Words lose power when overused. Jesus had the crowds. He had the stage. Thousands followed him, waiting to hear something. But he never tried to impress. He never rambled. He never spoke just to fill silence. Instead, he spoke only when it mattered. And when he did, every word had weight. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Peace, be still. Follow me. Simple, director, undeniably powerful. Jesus didn't use language as decoration. He used it as a weapon of truth, and that's where most of us get it backwards. We live in a culture that overtalks everything. Explaining, defending, convincing, reacting. We feel the pressure to speak fast, speak often, and speak loudly. But what if real power comes not from how much you say, but from how well you say it? Because words, like currency, lose value when they're overused. That's why manipulators talk a lot. They flood the room with words. They dominate the space with noise, because they know if they keep talking long enough, they might wear you down. But Jesus? He showed us a better way. He didn't explain himself to people who had already decided to reject him. He didn't argue for approval. He didn't beg to be understood. He spoke when it was time. And when he spoke, he changed lives. You don't have to say everything. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to defend your every move. In fact, the more you talk, the more power you give away. But when you learn to speak less, with more intention, your words start to carry gravity. They cut through the noise. They land with impact. They're remembered. So the next time you feel the urge to jump in, to prove your point, to win the moment, pause. Ask yourself, do I need to speak, or do I need to wait so that what I say actually matters? Because the world has enough voices, what it's missing is people who speak from peace. And when your words come from that kind of stillness, they don't just fill space, they shift it. 4. Silence builds respect. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he had every reason to speak. He had been betrayed by people he loved. He had been lied about. He had been beaten, mocked, and stripped in front of a crowd. Most of us, if we were in that moment, would have shouted in anger, defended ourselves, said something to prove the truth. But Jesus didn't. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince anyone of who he was. He stayed silent. And that silence, in his most painful moment, carried more weight than any speech ever could. The centurion at the cross. Standing nearby was a Roman centurion, a soldier trained for war, a man who had watched many people suffer and die. This wasn't new to him, but something about this moment was different. Jesus didn't curse the people hurting him. He didn't plead with the crowd. He didn't even speak to defend himself. And when he finally breathed his last breath, not in rage, but in surrender, the centurion looked up and said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." He didn't come to that conclusion because Jesus performed a miracle. He didn't say it because of a powerful sermon. He said it because of how Jesus suffered, silently. That quiet strength, that peace in pain, spoke volumes. It revealed something divine. In life, we all go through moments where we're misunderstood, where people say things about us that aren't true, where we feel pressure to defend ourselves, just to be seen or heard. And sometimes we do need to speak. Sometimes truth must be spoken in love. But other times, the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of confidence in who you are and whose you are. Because silence in the right moment can say more than any argument. People don't just listen to what you say, they watch how you live. And when they see you walk through difficulty without losing your peace, when they see you stay calm when others would explode, they begin to respect something in you that they can't always explain. When someone misunderstands you, pause before responding. When you're wrongly judged, remember, your peace speaks louder than your proof. When you feel pressure to react, ask God if silence is the stronger answer. Let your stillness speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your trust in God speak for itself. Because Jesus didn't earn the centurion's respect through words. He earned it through presence, through peace, through surrender. Sometimes the loudest message you'll ever give is the one you don't say out loud. 5. Stillness attracts heaven. If you look closely at the life of Jesus, you'll notice a pattern that's easy to miss. Before every public moment of power, there was a private moment of stillness. Before he chose his disciples, before he preached to the crowds, before he went to the cross, Jesus withdrew. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He didn't wait until he was overwhelmed. He didn't use silence as a last resort. Stillness wasn't a backup plan. It was the source of his power. While people rushed to be seen, he chose to be still. While others chased activity, he chased intimacy with the Father. He knew something we often forget. Stillness attracts heaven. Silence wasn't just protection. It was connection. Jesus didn't retreat to run away. He retreated to realign, to reconnect, to rest in the presence of God. Because when you live in constant noise, you can forget what matters most. The world pulls you in every direction. You carry responsibility. You face pressure, expectation, disappointment. And slowly, your soul gets tired. Your peace gets buried. Your inner strength fades. But Jesus shows us a different rhythm. One that says, before I speak, I sit. Before I lead, I listen. Before I move, I rest. This isn't laziness, it's spiritual clarity. It's the wisdom to know I cannot give what I haven't received. Stillness isn't doing nothing, it's doing what matters most. You don't need to wait for burnout to seek silence. You don't need a perfect schedule to find space. All you need is the willingness to be still, not scroll, not escape, but truly be still and let God meet you there, because He always does. How to apply this? Start small. Begin your mornings in silence, even just for 3 minutes. Turn off the noise for a moment in your car. Sit still with God at the end of your day. Don't try to fill the silence. Just breathe. Just be there. And let your heart say, God, I'm here. Speak if you want, or just sit with me. Because you weren't made to carry everything. You weren't made to move nonstop. You were made to walk with God. And that walk begins in the quiet. If you want real spiritual strength, don't just add more. Make space for less. Because the kingdom doesn't rise in the noise. It shows up in the stillness. And when you carry that stillness with you, you don't just feel heaven. You bring it with you. Walk in quiet strength. Let's take a breath and remember what we just uncovered. We've seen how Jesus didn't just speak truth, He embodied it in silence. When He stood before His accusers, He stayed silent, because silence disarms the enemy. When the storm raged, He slept, because stillness is control in chaos. He spoke only what mattered, because words lose power when overused. He suffered quietly, because silence builds respect. And He withdrew often, because stillness attracts heaven. These aren't just stories. They are spiritual strategies. A new way to live, a better way to lead. Because silence isn't absence, it's authority. Stillness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. So here's the question. What would change in your life if instead of reacting, you responded with holy stillness? What would shift in your conversations, your decisions, your emotions, if you followed the rhythm of Jesus instead of the chaos of the world? If this message stirred something in your spirit, share it with someone who's tired of the noise, someone who's overwhelmed, and needs a reminder that peace is possible. And as you walk forward today, don't forget, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that doesn't need to speak. Let that be your strength. Let that be your light.